Hello, everyone, and welcome to In Time. My name is Nicholas Lamar Soutter, and with me, as always, is Ansgar Odinson.
Hey, everybody out there on the internet.
And we have a special guest today. We have with us Aron Ra. Aron, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
So I think we're certainly going to talk a bit about who Aron is. I think everyone would be interested in that, but I think many of our audience actually already knows who he is. So what I would like to do is, rather than talk, or at least start with who he is, I'd like to discuss who he was, which I think is a fascinating subject. It's one that I think Ansgar and I both find very fascinating. And I just learned talking with Aron, he enjoys the topic as well. So Aron, who were you? Where were you born? And what was your childhood like? And how did you get into religion in the first place?
Well, like pretty much everybody else, you're born into it. I was raised in a family that had a disdain of skepticism, that skeptics were cynics who were missing out on the big picture that only the true believers could understand. And I remember scientists always being criticized for whatever it was that they did, and hearing all the time, well, he's got book learning, but he ain't got no common sense.
Mm-hmm.
kind of the way that I was raised, and a strong vibe against intellectualism. And you were just encouraged to believe whatever you read or whatever you were told, if it suits you, right? Because I mean, everybody picks and chooses, it seems. So as I was a little kid, I remember believing that God existed only because everybody believed that. I mean, it's like the idea of questioning whether God existed would be like questioning whether we really have a president, or is it just somebody that they put on TV and says is the president? Really, it's the Illuminati or some other group that's actually running things. I mean, if you make a suggestion like that, that's crazy, right? So I mean, you can't suggest that the president isn't really a president, just like you can't suggest that there's not really a God, because both would be insane. And
Yeah.
yeah, and I don't want to start the conversation that I fear that I've already started about people saying that presidents aren't really presidents. Yeah, I think recent events have proven that the Illuminati has lost all control.
It's off the rails, man.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I used to hear all the time about how the government knows absolutely everything that you do, and they can read the date on a quarter from the satellite in orbit, and yet they couldn't find Osama bin Laden, the man who's 6'5" on dialysis.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway,
I have to say this: Trump doesn't seem to me to be able to find his own feet. I mean, he's just wow. I can't believe that there's anything. And considering what he's doing, no, Illuminati have lost it.
Yeah,
Well,
I'm trying not to let it be a political rant.
well,
Okay.
I mean, here, a real apolitical thing. Just, I mean, the Illuminati conspiracy theory, really hinges on this strange notion that the government is somehow way more together than all evidence would show it to be. All evidence.
You got that right. So as I'm a kid, the fortunate thing is there was a couple of fortunate things for me. One was that my family, my mother at least, was Mormon, and she got some of the other family involved in that as well. And then she held to the practice that you don't indoctrinate a child until after they're of the age of reason, which is 8 years old.
Oh my God.
And that runs completely counter to all other religious indoctrination, because I mean, like the old Jesuit saying, give me a child until he is 7 and I will show you the man. And it's true that you can imprint things into a kid and modes of thinking such that you could actually impair that child's ability to ever think rationally, period, for the rest of their life. You really can do that to a child under that age.
I know to this day, being an atheist, I still, in dire times, have the instinct to pray. From my raising,
I do too. Yeah.
Yeah, the only carryover I think I have from that is that I still say God damn it when I get frustrated. And I hate that I'm so programmed, but it's like, if somebody drops a brick on your foot and you say, ow, well, that person might be from America, probably. But if you drop your brick on your foot and you say, aye, then maybe you're from Latin America. Because it's not even, it's a conditioned response. We don't even think about it. It's just the way you've been programmed to be. And that's what I'm talking about now. You could program irrational thinking into some kids by this type of indoctrination. But that's not what I got. So on my 8th birthday, my mom shows up with a Bible and starts telling me that this is the absolute truth. And the thing that she didn't realize was that I'm already in the 2nd grade by then. And one of my teachers saw that I had an interest in reptiles and dinosaurs, as any boy of the time did. And she gave me a book. I think she gave me her own book about dinosaurs. And that book had, and remind you, we're going back to like the 1960s. Or like maybe 1970 at the latest. So she gave me this book and it happened to have a kind of a dendrogram, and it was an illustrated depiction of how all life was related. And obviously that had a huge impact, since that's what I'm doing now. Is taxonomy, phylogeny, showing the interrelatedness of life form, and looking at that and seeing how everything blended together. It made perfect sense. It's surprising to me that other people can look at a dog and a cat and a sheep and a goat and not realize that the sheep and goat are obviously in one set and the dog and the cat are in another set, and they're both closer related to each other, and in a larger set, larger set, they're all mammals if you want to compare them to a bird or a lizard or something like that. I was very good when I was a little boy at watching the game. If one of these things is not like the other on Sesame Street, I can figure out this kind of classification, but a lot of other people seemingly can't, and I don't get how they can't. But I had this, and my mother comes in and she's telling me now that the Bible is the absolute truth and the Word of God. And my initial response was, "No, it isn't. Look what it says here." Yeah, and this is not something that my family could tolerate. So I was given the Bible and I was told that I had to read it, and I had to accept that it is true. And I couldn't find a way to do that. I mean, in Genesis 3 gave me huge problems. Because it was obviously a parable. This is all it can be. It's got to be talking about. It's obviously not talking about a tree of life and a tree of knowledge of good and evil. These are obviously not real literal trees that you could cut down and build a house out of. These are parables for for the result of choices made. You can either eat of the fruit of the tree of eternal life, meaning you can just stay the way you are forever, or you can develop morality in which you can never go back to your childhood innocence again. I mean, the old saying at the time that you can never go home again, right? Because home changes just as much as you do. So it's never, you can't go home because you're different, even if your home hasn't changed.
Yeah.
So I come to talk to my parents, my grandparents, to explain my interpretation of this. And I remember saying that, so you got this book that was written in the Middle East that blames the woman for everything wrong with the world. And we already know that people of this kind of ancient culture already believe that either, in some cases, that women had no souls, because that was a big thing back at the time. I remember hearing people argue that women had no souls.
Jesus.
Yeah, there were religious cults that said that only men had souls, women did not.
That's insane.
And
I never even heard that one. Yeah.
There were some people that would argue, and Islam currently argues that when a man goes to heaven, that he's going to be assigned women. And what do the women have? If this is not his former partner. This is not a life continued in the afterlife. Yeah, these are new women, a new harem given to you by assignment. And do they have a soul? Apparently not. They only exist for your pleasure. Literally exist only for your pleasure.
So anyway, magical sex dolls.
Yeah. There were a number of cults like that at the time, like the Manson Cult, for example. There was another one that talked about, if I remember correctly, it was a Manson Cult that was talking about how only men had souls and women didn't. But there was a number of people that said that. So women were considered not to have any intelligence. They didn't have any decision-making ability, according to all these ancient stories. So when you're going to blame everything on the woman, well, then it can't even be her idea. They have to have this other character invented. So we now have a talking snake that gives her the idea that causes all this perversion. When what really they're telling is the same thing that they told me in second grade, that when men went to the Wild West, they brought their guns and there was violence and everything. And when women went to the Wild West, suddenly, everybody puts their guns away and are on good behavior. That women actually sort of brought civilization to the Old West. That's what I was taught. And so, at 8 years old, I'm explaining to my parents that maybe this passage is trying to give credit to women for establishing civilization or calming men down because they're the home keepers or whatever. And maybe that's what the parable is talking about. And no part of any interpretation, because there were a number of others, could my family accept. And my grandfather said the most absurd thing I could ever imagine him saying. He says, "Well, then what is the meaning of life?" I'm like, the meaning of life? What the hell does that even mean? That was just, I could find no value in that question. When you go to, as it used to be at the time, people would talk about this, or you go to the gypsy fortune teller and she would like cast down the chicken bones, or she would drop out the tea leaves, or a lot of the neo-pagans that would be doing the shuffling of the tarot cards, right? You go or dice even, completely random things, and then you read what they mean, right? Well, it doesn't mean anything. You're just interpreting something. You're interpreting a meaning that's not really there. That life doesn't have a meaning. This was intrinsic to my being for the longest time. And so I have a huge problem with philosophers arguing that we should have a meaning of life, like a pre-intended purpose. Obviously not. Not just evidently not, but obviously not. You know, that's not even a possibility. But I was convinced nonetheless that there were supernatural things, because the media at the time was always showing, they were showing that the studies of like the Russians who had these ball bearings on a table, and the woman would like wave over the table with her hands, and then she would cause the ball bearings to move around by manipulating the magnetism in her body or whatever the hell she is doing. And
Oh yeah,
there was
the
like,
media was full of shows like that. Like even what was it? Unsolved Mysteries when I was a kid did a lot to convince me that
Oh,
all that
Jesus,
crap was
yeah.
real. Yeah.
yeah, and you go back to my generation, it's even worse, because we had the show called In Search of with Leonard Nimoy.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Now,
that's right.
Leonard
Yeah,
Nimoy was on Star Trek, so obviously everything he said sounded logical, right?
Right. Spock is
So,
telling me that psychics are real, so psychics are real.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so they're showing all of this scientific evidence of life force, of telekinetics, of remote viewing, all these kind of things, and you have ghost apparitions. Parapsychology in the 1970s was considered by many people to be a legitimate science. That was a thing. I mean, if you go back,
Ghostbusters.
yeah, not even Ghostbusters. Go back to I think it was earlier than that, to Poltergeist, right? When they bring in all they're doing the measurements of ectoplasm.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh, geez, yeah.
everybody I knew in the world thought that ectoplasm was a real thing. I mean, everybody.
we laugh now in retro, but it's a little scary, and you kind of wonder how we're probably doing similar things today, and how are
Well,
people
not
gonna be
just that, there are
laughing?
still people who believe. I mean, there are still people who watch those shows about, you know, people going around with EMF meters going, "What was that? What was that?" And they believe this crap.
You get 13 seasons of guys not being able to find stuff.
Right.
Yeah, well,
Right?
no, but I hear
Hey, they got some static on tape. Come on now.
well, to be fair, I hear that next week they will finally do it.
Of
Yeah.
course they will.
So when I was a little boy, I mean, one of my heroes was Tim Dinsdale, who was famous only for being the foremost authority on the Loch Ness Monster.
Oh, good.
Because absolutely everybody I knew wholly believed that the Loch Ness Monster was absolutely real. Our newspapers were showing that they'd gotten a new photograph of its flipper up close from a submarine that they launched. I'm not kidding. So we're
No, I
getting
know you're not. That's what's a little scary.
news.
I'm laughing because on this stream I try not to cry if I can help it.
Yeah, this is
my mother told me like that this was fact, that there were tunnels between Loch Ness and the ocean that the Loch Ness Monster traveled between, and that's why it could eat in while living in such a small environment, that it would swim out to the ocean, get its food, and come back to Loch Ness.
Yeah, I just feel like a complete boob because I was a kid, right? I mean,
Yeah.
really that was my problem. I'm getting the authority is television and newspapers. Only my television is In Search of and other things like that, and the newspapers include the Weekly World News. Not kidding. You know, I was told to believe that. And then I was given the books that I was given by my family to read were all absolute nonsense. I was given stuff by Velikovsky and Zechariah Sitchin and you know, Chariots of the Gods, right? About the Nazca lines, about the alien landing strips and all that kind of shit. I was fed books like this throughout my childhood. And I remember coming to an epiphany, if you will, that there was a lot of things that I liked to read about, and it frustrated me that when I'm reading about these things about, you know, cryptozoology or time travel sequences where somebody goes to sleep in New Jersey and wakes up in Paris, and it's the next morning, and it's not physically possible that he could have made that distance, and now he spent the next 3 days trying to get back home. Well, how do you explain things like that? It never occurred to me that the story was made up. That's the explanation.
Yeah.
I'm taking because the sources claim if this is what happened. These are the facts. Well, no, those are not the facts. The fact is you made up the shit. It's all bullshit.
Yeah.
And you can't. When I was growing up, you could never say that was the explanation. You had to accept what was told to you. So I was fed all kinds of absurdity. And it's strange that I grew up with all these people, and I was never a creationist ever. But I managed to go through my entire childhood without ever discussing creation or evolution with my family. Ever. Isn't it strange? It just never comes up. I was an adult in college before it ever occurred to me to say to my mother that it was a mystery to me that there were people who are so stupid that they believe that all the different species were created separately by magic. And that's what my mother had always believed, and that's who I said it to. I'm an adult when I say this to my mother.
So your
And
parents were full on creationists.
Yeah. They just never talked about it.
Right.
How did your mother respond when you said that, if you don't mind my asking?
Well, that started a huge rift. That's when the conversation first happened with us. Religion was a topic that was largely avoided throughout my childhood, and for reasons that'll probably be obvious in a moment. I was making fun of things. I mean, I'm getting ahead of myself. I got to get back to where I was.
Yeah. You can get back to this.
Go back up to a progression. So, I mean, I believe that God exists, and there are things that don't match up, but that's because I don't know them very well. I can't understand why there are these apparent contradictions and such. And so I'm given the Bible, and I'm told, and this time I was about 12. I remember going to visit some girl that I thought liked me. She told me she liked me, so so I'm following her home like a puppy. And then what it actually was that she was charged by her family to do that, to seduce a boy from school and bring him home so that we can proselytize to him. So this girl brings me home, and their family seems real nice for all of 10 minutes, and if that. And then very quickly they're all undulating, writhing, they're speaking in tongues, and they're yelling in my face that any minute now, this is like 1975, any minute now the world is going to be consumed in flames. They're going to disappear in heaven, and I'm going to be roasted with all the sinners. This is going to happen it could be any second, and I need to repent my sins. And this is what they're shouting in my face. And I remember thinking,
it's an interesting first date.
Yeah. So I'm thinking I'm like 12 years old, and I'm in a madhouse. I'm surrounded by crazy people. There's not a chance that there's any truth to what they're saying. They're just nuts. There's no other way for a child to interpret this, is that they're just insane.
Yeah. And
I had to get out of there as quickly as I could. And I remember being prompted to read the Bible, because this is not the way, my family and other people, when we lived in Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, where my family is Mormon and everybody else is Mormon. There are places in Utah and such that if you're not Mormon, you're not employed. Okay, so where they own and control everything. But when we moved to Los Angeles, and think about this, I lived in Los Angeles in the late 60s. There's a whole other cultural difference. I just try to imagine the hippie woo that I'm being fed day to day, living in it. And I gotta tell you, like when I moved out of Los Angeles, I mean, I moved out like 77, and it was like, remember that Mammoth was just playing at the Whiskey. It was like the first time that Mammoth was Van Halen, right? And I remember listening to Van Halen talking, and we were doing this interview, and I'm thinking, dude, I sound exactly like that guy. So anyway, this is what happens when you grow up in Los Angeles. And I realize I live in Texas now, and I have to fight that accent down. But I grew up in LA area, and I'm surrounded by hippies. Everybody believes in spiritual energy of every possible kind. And I've got all kinds of woo around me. And then I'm told that I need to read the Bible, because the Bible is the absolute truth and the word of God, and God is infinite wisdom and love, right? So I read what God says. I'm gonna have a window into higher consciousness. This is going to be the ultimate truth and everything. And of course, you don't have to read very much of the Bible, do you, before you realize that this is not this was not written by a supreme being, not even a superior being. This was written by a handful of contradictory, inferior, very inferior beings.
Yeah.
And that's why they hold all these ideas that are absolutely repugnant. So it wasn't very far into it before I threw it across the room in disgust.
Mhm.
And then I did the thing, which I think it's in Matthew 6, where it says, don't be like the hypocrites who pray in public where other people can see them, pray in the privacy of your
Yeah.
own room. And then that's what I did. I prayed in the privacy of my own room. And I prayed to God, demanding that he do one of two things, that he either explain himself as to why he could be involved in any of the heinous stupidity that is attributed to him in the Bible, or
Yep.
justify how the Bible got him all wrong. It's just that the Bible was written by people. The people have no idea what the fuck they're talking about. So they wrote up a bunch of whole different holy books like the Bhagavad Gita and the Quran and the Adnagnash and all that. And so they're all writing these different holy books trying to, as they said in the old parable, a bunch of blind men trying to describe an elephant. You know, one's got his tail, one's got his trunk, one's got his leg, and they don't know what the hell it is. You know, one's got his ear and so forth.
Yep. Yep.
So maybe that's what it is. But the Bible's just written by people, and people don't have a fucking clue, and that's why the Bible's wrong about everything. And I can honestly say that prayer has been answered, because ever since then, I've had confirmation again and again and again and again and again that the Bible is nothing but shit. That there's not a word of truth in that. I mean, you've got mention of famous places and people occasionally integrated into the story, and you have a mixture of straight up myth, and then then you have what is it, exaggerated legend and highly embellished other tales from other sources. And so if you want to say that there's a kernel of truth to, say, like the Tower of Babel, for example, you know, that's one of the most ridiculous stories in there, and yet there's a kernel of truth to it. They built the Marduk ziggurat, or not the Marduk ziggurat, the tower that was actually in Babylon.
Mhm.
And that was started by Hammurabi, and of course I didn't know this at the time. I eventually find out that they start this tower, and at the point that they started this tower, they were teaching school. They were teaching cuneiform, reading and writing. And then when the Mesopotamian empires fell, all of their written stuff nobody could read anymore, because they're not teaching it anymore. They all like go off into the wastelands, and nobody has formal classes, and they'd all lost written. So this went on for about 1,000 years until they reinvent writing and put their old stories back down again, where they've been telling them, recounting them orally, you know, as oral traditions in different tribes and communities for a long time. And you can imagine how all of these stories have evolved. And then we find something like our Suburnapolis Library, where we find, oh, this is what the story originally was 1,000 years earlier. And now we see what the stories have mutated into. Now that they've adopted other elements from other cultures and integrated that into these stories and appropriated and embellished and so forth.
A quick
That's where
question:
the Bible came
Was there
from.
a specific Bible passage or story or something like that that really keyed you onto this path of, like, you know, basically God explain yourself?
No.
I don't remember what. I just remember that it was Genesis, and I could. It was like a last straw minute,
Right.
and it's like there was so many things that already built up to just.
Yeah.
I just read the one last thing. I'm like, no, fuck this.
Yeah. I think for me the final straw,
Yeah,
just to
I
add a
can't
little.
remember what that final straw
Got it.
was.
Okay. I was
Yeah,
curious because for me it was reading about the, you know, God basically commanding people to take sex slaves from captured women, and that to me was just like, and I actually
not
did
even
some.
women.
Well,
Not even
I did
women.
no. When I researched the actual original Hebrew language, and it literally says keep them in your home for a certain amount of time, then rape them, and they are your bride. That to me was like the final straw. That was like, and wow.
And we're done.
Yeah.
Right.
So you got to remember that the Hebrews have a pretty fine line about, you know, the adult versus the child.
Hmm.
Yeah, they have that the celebration of the what is it, the Hebrew celebration of manhood, bar mitzvah, and I think that the girls have a bat mitzvah also.
Yeah.
And so this is marking when you're now in your teen years. So when the Bible talks about, you know, kill every male among the little ones,
Hmm.
and other translations have put it as well, now you're keeping the girls among the little ones.
Right.
And you're going to kill all the ones that are laden with a man. So now you've got a bunch of children. Are they children? Well, some translations say that it's the infant girls, and some of them say that the girl children, but they're not adults. There's not a single one of them.
Right.
They're all preteens. It's the best possible interpretation I can get. So all of your booty, all of your slaves, they're preteen children, and you're going to kill the boys and rape the girls.
Yeah.
And that's I think Numbers 31.
And that basically plants your flag of ownership.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, but
Yeah.
but hold on. You're gonna give them 30 days to mourn the terrible slaughter of everyone and everything they know before. So this was a better system than the one that came before. So it's all good, right?
Yeah, they didn't understand how the Stockholm syndrome worked, but they knew that.
By the way, Kitty the Atheist left us a quick super chat asking if you will ever do another Unholy Trinity tour.
February is the date.
Okay.
I don't remember what the exact date is, but yeah, we're doing one in Tulsa, Oklahoma in February. It's not a tour, but we're doing a kind of a reunion thing.
Awesome.
Yeah, we have been asked. There's a number of people that have asked, hey, please come to the UK or come to New York or whatever, and I would love to do that, but of course there's all kinds of arrangements that have to be made.
Yeah.
When we did the one in Australia, that was a fantastic tour. I loved how the Atheist Foundation of Australia held everything together. That was great. That was a great moment. But anyway, getting back to the story here, and I don't want people to think that my judgment of the Bible meant that I was yet a skeptic, because that really hadn't occurred yet.
Yeah.
It was the epiphany that I had, was that I liked reading about all of these paranormal experiences, psychic phenomena, astral projection especially, and other things like that. I was really into transcendental meditation and all of that. Los Angeles hippie in the 1960s and 70s, of course, right? And at some point I realized that when I'm reading about all the woo stuff, all the books contradict each other. And none of that stuff, there's no mention of aliens, flying saucers and all of that in science books. There's no reference to Moses or Noah in science books, or much less the Loch Ness monster and stuff like that. So why not? And I remember thinking to myself that maybe I could just read the things that reinforce what I already want to believe in. And as soon as I said that in my own mind, I remember realizing at once how dishonest that is.
Mm-hmm.
That whatever is actually true matters more than whatever I want to believe. I don't want to believe it if it isn't true. And the moment I find out it's not, or it doesn't even have to be proven that it's not true, because a lot of people will say that I'm going to believe what I want to believe, and you have to prove it wrong. You don't have to prove me wrong. It's enough to know that if there's not sufficient evidence to show that I'm right.
Yeah.
I came to the conclusion that and it still took me. This was still a process to realize how many different things fit into the category of things that I had to discard. So I want people to understand I'm still believing a bunch of ridiculous things that I think are supported by science, and I have to find out later that they're not. But I mean, the idea that an unsupported assertion has no more credence than one that has already been proven wrong. They're both at zero. You have to show substance to your claim, or we literally have nothing to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the substance I was given for transcendental meditation was that there was a lot of books about it. There was a lot of claims being made that are supposed to be supported by presence of ectoplasm that are claimed that they have in their labs, and that they study, and that they find that it's made of materials that are not of the earth and all of that. And how do I know that everybody's lying to me? And why? And wouldn't it be insane to think that everybody's lying to you?
Yeah.
And at some point, when you come away from religious belief, especially in Los Angeles in the 1970s, you've got to realize that everybody's lying to you. Everybody believes these ridiculous things, and it's kind of hard to go against the entirety of the population. So, I mean, I was heavy into transcendental meditation, and what eventually broke me out of that was when I would talk about astral projection and stuff with other people who profess to have done it, none of the notes match. How come there's no consistency here?
Right.
Yeah. Why does nothing correlate? And I can
It's
tell you
the
honestly,
opposite of every other whereas like let's say you're studying evolution, you can look into 8 different fields of science and they all come to the same conclusion. They all come to the same results. Whereas this is everyone has their own unique and individual and conflicting conclusion.
yeah,
Well, and in every country where they're doing any one given field, even across different countries, reach the same results. So if it's even
Right.
in the same field, yeah.
Now I remember when Ghostbusters came out that I was so skeptical at that point. I remember that there was the interview with Janine where she's talking to Winston Zedmore.
Yeah.
Do you believe in astral projection, spirit photography, full trance mediums, the theory of the Loch Ness monster, all that kind of shit?
Yeah.
I believed every word of that, every one of those things. I'm qualified to be a Ghostbuster, and I've made this joke several times. But I remember investigating at some point after that. It was shortly after that I started looking at what is the actual substance for any of the things that I believe in. What can I actually verify? And I just started looking at specific things. What is the evidence for the Loch Ness monster really? What is the evidence for astral projection really? And so forth. And one by one, everything that I once believed in collapsed. And there was a bigger issue in that being into, well, at one point, I remember I'm doing the reborn Christian thing. My best friend in high school at that time, I think we were both 19, and my best friend then is now an ordained Southern Baptist minister and was running a Christian school where the motto of the school was that the Bible is the only source of truth in our world and that everything else is a lie. His motto is reality is wrong. Yeah. If everything else is a lie, except for the fable, and we know the fable is bullshit, then
Yeah.
what the hell?
Right.
So he was. I've had an interview with him since, and around 2004, I met up with him again, and I sat in his office, and we had this discussion, and it was a kind of a painful discussion, and he made it abundantly clear that reality has absolutely no value to him. It's the land of pure imagination that he pretends to live in is the only value he has in life.
Wow.
But when we were 19,
Mm.
and I remember doing this thing where he became a Southern Baptist minister, so he's talking me into Christianity, and I remember doing the whole thing where I accept Jesus, and you get this overwhelming euphoria, right? And so I'm floating around the room. I've been charged with the power of Jesus and all like this. And this went on for like a couple of hours. I'm almost drunk with this dizzy feeling, and I remember asking him in a moment of clarity, so how do I know that this is really the power of Jesus and that it's not, a demon lying to me or myself fooling me some way?
Yeah.
And he grabbed me by both shoulders with this huge beaming smile and he said, just keep telling yourself it's Jesus until you believe it.
Oh my.
And a few times since, I've heard him say, fake it till you make it.
Wow.
So for him, religious belief really is make believe. That's it. It's pretend. And I've run into a number of not everybody. I want people to understand it's not everybody, but there's a lot of people out there that know that what they believe is not true. And on very rare occasions, I've gotten people to admit that they know that what they believe isn't true, but they're going to believe it anyway.
That was definitely my grandfather. In fact, in private, he was a social Christian. Like in public, it was very much, this is just what you believe. This is what you profess. This is what you do. You go to church. But in private, he was saying, no, he would told me what was he said? Something like, there's no way none of that could have ever happened. There's no way that could be true. You know what I mean? So it was,
yeah.
even he in his very deeply programmed intuition knew that there's no way this can be true, but you have to believe because the social fallout of not believing was just too great.
Yeah, no, when I was a little kid, I remember, my one of my babysitters, again, when I was about 8, and I think this was like 1970, maybe 71. I'm maybe muddying up the dates a little bit, but I remember being a little kid about that time, back when cars were at their coolest. My babysitter told me something about Jesus turning water into wine, and
Yeah.
I remember I didn't know a lot about chemistry, obviously, as a little boy, but I mean, everybody knows that water is H2O, right? And I know that wine is fermented sugars, so it's sugar and alcohol. And I don't know what the chemical construct of sugar and alcohol are, but I'm asking my babysitter, well, how does he change 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom into whatever sugar and alcohol are? And coincidentally, the only difference later that I found out is carbon. You just change the mix of
Right.
hydrogen and oxygen and add some carbon to it, but and you can get alcohol, and you can, with those, you can get up. So I'm asking her, how does he do that? And that question from an 8-year-old threw her for a loop, because you're just supposed to believe what you're told and get excited that you believe it, because belief is an act of will, of mind over matter, of convincing yourself of things you know aren't even true.
Well, and they mix
And
in a lot
I've had people admit to me even that you have to get excited about the fact that you believe something that is utterly impossible.
yeah, that's for me one of
And
the
that's
things
a
that's
virtue,
really
yeah.
interesting, that you're supposed to mix in this sort of celebration, make the self-delusion as happy and as joyous as possible.
Exactly. So that what it ends up being, and it was still years before I figured this out, that the whole concept of God is, honestly, it is literally, it's not analogous to, it is an imaginary friend for grown-ups.
Right.
Yeah.
That's honestly literally what it is. It's not even a parable. That's honestly what it is. But it took me a while, as I said, to figure that out. And went through. I didn't have faith in Christianity. I didn't believe anything up until that time. I didn't believe anything on faith. I believed that because authority told me to. I couldn't imagine being an atheist, because I was told that an atheist is someone who knows. I was told that an atheist is someone who knows there is no God, rather than someone who simply doesn't believe in a God, which is what an atheist really is. And I had to go back to the pre-Huxley definitions to realize that that's what atheism always was, before Huxley came up with another word just to give a bunch of pedants a pedestal to sit on, so that they can pretend to be in the middle of the road and pretend to be better than both sides.
Yep.
You either believe or you don't. That's the real thing. And the people who don't, that's the atheists. Those are the ones that, according to the Greeks back in the day, atheos meant godless. But I was told that atheists they believe in nothing, which is another distortion, right? It's not that we don't believe in anything on faith, but rather that we have a faith-based belief in nothing. Let's just turn everything upside down and completely strawman the opposite position. But what do I know? I'm a kid. So the way that it's portrayed to me, I'm thinking, so atheists are nihilists, that neither one believes that anything exists? Because nihilism was misrepresented too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it turns out that nihilism really means that you don't believe that there's a meaning of life that is arbitrarily imposed from outside. So by that definition, I'm nihilist. But I wouldn't have identified as a nihilist when I was a kid, because a nihilist was somebody that, like the Zen Buddhists, whatever, they didn't believe that reality is real. This is how other people are misrepresenting other positions, that they have to use these straw man misrepresentations to keep me in their fold. And this is what religion has been doing to keep atheism suppressed. If you can't burn us at the stake anymore, then you have to keep our numbers from rising by lying to us about what atheists are.
Right.
Yeah. So I went to what actually is a faith-based belief, and it took me a while to realize that too. I didn't go immediately. When my friend uttered those words, just keep telling yourself it's Jesus until you believe it.
Yeah.
Instantly, I'm no longer Christian. Boom.
Yeah.
That was it. That was such a dishonest statement. That
Yeah.
it revealed to me that there's no truth to Christianity. If you're admitting to me that you have to lie to yourself until you believe your own lie, that's it. We're done, right?
Yeah.
And then quite suddenly, a whole lot of blocks in my jigsaw puzzle fit into place, and I couldn't figure out where they went before. I'm like, now I get that, but I wasn't there yet. I didn't like blink out of Christianity and into rationalism.
But that was about college years, you said, I think, for that one?
If I remember correctly, I was 19.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Although I remember that Ghostbusters came out, I think, in '84. So that would have been later. So I'm a little I know that my memory has confused things a little bit. And it's important to remember that too, because I found out a number of times that just because you remember something doesn't mean it happened like that.
Oh, there are so many things I remember happening in the 80s, and then I go and look it up. I'm like, no, that was the 90s.
I had a fierce argument with my mother when she was insisting adamantly, I mean, like throwing things at me, that the Beatles were on the Ed Sullivan Show in the 1950s. This is, I can pull up a TV guide. I can prove this wrong. I mean,
right.
But her memory is that's what it was, and you can't ever. How do you? Back before there was an internet, it was so hard to win arguments like this.
Yeah, Jesus.
Yeah, that's one of the things I love about the internet now. I mean, I constantly heard about the millions of flash frozen mammoths. The Noah's flood thing. That's all the water erupted into the sky from what is it, Walt Brown's hydroplate theory, right? That the continents suddenly crack and collapse, and when they do, all the water shoots up into the sky, and somehow that instantly freezes everything, which instantly freezes mammoths. and that all these mammoths were found with, like, in the process of eating tropical vegetation, so that there was that North Siberia was somehow tropical at one point, and then was suddenly instantly frozen. Well, it turns out, for anybody who's heard that story, it turns out that there are millions of mammoths across Siberia. There are fossils of millions of mammoths, because there have been millions of mammoths living for tens of thousands of years across Siberia. Only 51 of them were found in any degree of preservation by frozen, right? Only one of them was found to have any plant material like what they're describing, and those were tulips, which are endemic to Denmark, hardly tropical by anybody's interpretation. And every one of those 51 mammoths was already in some stage of desiccation, meaning that they had broken their leg or got trapped in a hole or something, that was partially eaten by wolves or what have you before they froze.
Right.
So all that is bullshit. But if you don't have the internet, you can't counter these. And that's largely how religion managed to grow so much. That's how all they discover things in all these scientific papers that nobody could ever cite the scientific paper. They can just tell you what they found. Right.
That's one of the languages that really bothers me in these shows is scientists say this, or scientists believe this. Which ones?
Yeah. Well, I got
yeah.
one that, according to Darwin, animals were once plants. Somebody told me that the other day. Really? Exactly how did Darwin phrase that sentence? Because he didn't. We know he didn't. Right? It's just people talking out of their ass. And when you didn't have an internet to check it, people got away with all kinds of shit.
Yeah.
So I move on into a darker period than when I was Christian. Was when I started when I didn't jump right into atheism out of Christianity. Because I thought there was still scientific basis for ectoplasm, for life force, for a number of things like this. And so I had to investigate that further. And I thought the best way to do that would be to explore it with my own eyes. Mm-hmm. So I knew, not just from Los Angeles, but I mean, still at the time, there was a lot of people in the neo-pagan stuff. So we're all doing transcendental meditation, and we're all exploring auras, and the thing where you have we could do this. You could psych yourself up to perceive almost anything. I figured that out. You get some drums going, the right kind of drums. You get some firelight going, and you can conjure all kinds of shit. It's all in your own mind, and you can share it with other people. That's the brilliant thing.
Yeah.
If you and a friend are both fixated on the same thing, you'll both see it.
There's
Isn't that
actually
amazing?
some really interesting research into this where it's not even that you're seeing it at the time, but you are imprinting the memory that you are seeing it. And so you remember looking back, because that's all this ever is it's we have to rely on our memory. And if you remember seeing something, then you saw it.
Yep. Yep. Now imagine coming to the point where we'll get to in a moment when you remember seeing something and you know that didn't really happen, but you remember it anyway.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, I had a number of paranormal encounters. You know, I
Hmm.
remember I remember Lemmy from Motorhead, the closest thing I ever had to a god. Uh,
Mm.
he, he made a number. He wrote a number of songs that were hugely anti-theist, but we couldn't classify him as a skeptic because he said, "I believe in." Well, he said, "Well, I believe in ghosts because I've seen one." You know, so a lot of us have quote unquote, seen ghosts. I've seen a few of them in a number of different apparitions.
Mm.
I remember at one point I I I'm hesitant to talk about anything that I did and used to brag about from that period of my life, the neo-paganism stuff, because I realized that I was just fooling myself,
Hmm.
and it was other people helping me to fool myself and using me to help them fool themselves.
Yep.
I had a girlfriend who was into astral projection, and boy, she played a good act. Damn. So she told me she was going to go visit me out of body that
Hmm.
night. So she tells me this in high school. She's going to come visit me out of body.
Yep.
So I decide I'm going to do a proper scientific experiment.
Okay.
So I'm not at home. She says she can find me. She doesn't use geography to locate me. She's going to track my soul somehow. She's going to be able to find out where I am just by thinking about the core of my essence, and she will just kind of zoom in on where I am. And
Yep.
it's not a spatial kind of thing because
Sounds
this is
reasonable.
astral. Yeah, this is astral projection, so it's a completely different set of physics, right? But I'm still going to conduct a proper experiment. So instead of being at home, I go spend the night at a friend's house. And then to further jack things up, we
This is the kind of thing
he
that gets
has
you to lose girlfriends quickly. But yeah, please continue.
yeah, so he has in his bedroom he has two beds, right? There's like the two like the little teeny beds. What are they? Like the twin beds, but they're not bunk beds. They're separate. They're side by side. So we turn one of them so it's perpendicular to the other one, and then we took one of the box springs off his bed and put it on mine. So I have two box springs and then a mattress, and he has nothing. He's just got the mattress. So we did all that, and then I go to meet her in high school the next day, and she said that one, I wasn't in my regular place, that there was someone else there. She described something that had giant eyes like an owl, or that looked like it had giant eyes like an owl. And my friend at the time had one of those giant reel-to-reel tape players.
Hmm.
And I remember looking at that
Wow.
thinking, that looks like a goddamned owl. So I mean, that's amazing. She goes, and you were sleeping not together, but you're higher than he is, or he's below you, and you're not at the right angle. And I'm like, how are you getting all this? That's not possible unless you were actually there. Now,
Wow.
I've never been able to figure out how she said all that. She was not a friend of the friend that I was staying with.
Right.
And that was another part of the equation was that these two are not going to talk on the phone.
Yeah.
They don't like each other. So I've never figured out how she managed to explain all of it. She passed my test.
Yeah.
I made
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
rigorous damn test and she passed it. And I could never figure out how she did it. And then she told me about another night that she visited me out of body and that I much appreciated that visit, that I had a physical response. And she implied, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, that type of response.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And to summarize, it was very like the scene in Ghostbusters where the ghost comes to visit.
I know, yeah. I think we all know the scene you're talking about.
Yeah. And you know, it's funny when you're in the right mindset, when you're open to believe all these things, that all of that seems somehow rational.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so one of the most pronounced events that I ever experienced in my neo-pagan stage was I go to visit a friend of mine. I go stay at night at his house, and he's like this long-haired hippie dude, and he's all into druidic magic. And everybody I knew pretty much was hippies because that was the time, and we were real close to New Mexico, so everybody was hippies. And so we were doing all of this meditation and everything, and at some point, suddenly the room it changed temperature. It suddenly got cold. I mean, like instantly got cold.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And we both felt a weird presence in the room, and we both looked at each other like there's this the fuck just something's different, something's here.
Yeah.
So for whatever reason he reached up to turn off the bedroom light so that we could see. When you're talking about paranormal things, that makes sense. So he turns off the bedroom light. So he turns off the bedroom lights, and there's a flurry of shadows flying around the room. So there's definitely a number of somethings
Right.
in this room, and we
And
realized that what?
no, please finish.
Well, we realized that there's a number of somethings in this room. He and I, and so we take up our positions to combat whatever it is, if that makes any sense. Again, I'm talking from the spiritualist fucking hippie that I was.
Right.
So many multiple decades ago. Yeah, and so I remember he goes into this meditative position where he's kind of like this. You know, 'cause we used to do this thing where we would build up this psychic energy in the palms of our hands, and you would close your fingers together, and you could feel that energy begin to provide resistance, and you could feel that you're building something up. And I remember in our meditation, at one point, I could see the glow of the energy that was building in our hands. I could even see the shadow of the aura around the glow in the shadow on the wall. The shadow of the glow. The glow
How
cast a shadow. Does that
does
make any damn
that?
sense? But we're talking about
Okay.
spiritualism, New Age
Yep.
paganism, right? Everything makes sense.
Right.
And there's
Okay.
no drugs involved, by the way. Although I know everybody thinks that there were no drugs involved.
Yeah. Well, thank you for clarifying that. That thought had in fact crossed my mind.
Just a
It
little
has
bit.
crossed a few people's minds, but I have to specify that that was not the case. I did not enjoy drugs, and if you want to hear why, that's a whole other podcast. But okay, I've never been into drugs, and so there was no drugs at this point.
To me, this all sounds like, our brains are programmed to do as little thinking as possible, and we run off of instinct, and we really do. We run off of instinct. And so there are things happening. There are sensations that you are taking in and your brain is translating into feelings that you're not getting like the raw data from. You know what I mean? A flicker of a sound, off to your left or whatever could easily be translated not into your mind as, okay, a flicker of sound off the left, just something's there, a presence. You know what I mean? And you get that feeling.
Yeah, and it's worse even than what you just described. While what you said is correct,
Mm-hmm.
it's worse even than you elucidate. So, in doing this this meditation thing where I would build up this ball of energy, I remember my friend and I. This was a great way to get girls, by the way, in like
Yeah.
in like 1980.
The truth comes out. This is really what I'm not sure you ever believed. I think it's just
Oh,
like
what we will do in
You
the
start
pursuit
showing
of
off
girls.
spiritual mastery, you've got yourself some babes. That's
Yeah.
I remember going over to my friend's house, and he was like this skinny little 15-year-old kid, a little 15-year-old hippie. But I go over to his house, and he's got like six high school girls that are older than him, and they're all gathered around him in a circle as he's conducting the seance. I'm like, oh, you master player. Yeah, because I mean, it's amazing how we want to believe things, and we will find evidence for the things we want to believe.
Yeah.
Yes.
That was a huge lesson that I took out of my neo-pagan stage, to be very wary about what I want to believe. And that's what the scientific method is all about. If you believe something, find a way to prove it wrong and try to prove it wrong. And there's a counterintuitive approach, but that's the best approach to take to keep from deceiving yourself.
Yeah.
So I'm in this room with my friend, and we see this flurry of shadows, and we can start to make out what the shadows are. And they are equivalent to gargoyles. So we have little hexapod things. We got arms, legs, wings. And I remember he gets into this meditative state, and I remember seeing in perfect clarity the leg of one of these things cocking back and kicking him and knocking him over, face over forward. My friend is being attacked, and he got cut. They slashed him across his chest, and his chest is now bleeding. And for whatever reason, I guess they don't think that I'm psychically powerful enough. They're not fucking with me. They're only attacking him. And I felt useless because they're disrespecting me because they're not even afraid of me. And I remember at some point he was doing some kind of a seance, again with a collection of girls. And in the middle of that seance, and I'm sitting there watching, and suddenly his shirt has got blood on it. As he's doing the seance, he just starts bleeding. They pull the shirt off, and he's got the 3 claw marks that he had a week before have come back.
Wow.
Yeah. Now that's all pretty impressive, isn't it?
Yeah, that would convince
Yeah.
me. I wouldn't question anything after that, I think.
Yeah. Now this is what's in my memory.
Yeah.
Now he and I, we had a falling out, as people do.
Yeah.
And I lost track of the other girl that I did the Transcendental Meditation with. You know, she ran off with her father, like suddenly fled for whatever reason. They just disappeared. The family just packed up and gone there. And all I know is they went to Las Vegas, and I never was able to contact her again until the magic of the internet. You can find people again. You know, and so I found both of them. And by the time that I did, I had come to this other epiphany. I had believed for the longest time, and I don't know how much time we have. I don't know how long it's been.
We can go as long as you need. Nick is going to have to cut
time
out soon, but
right.
we can. I'm
appreciate
here, so we can go as long as you need.
I haven't seen anything in a super chat. I don't know if anybody cares about what I'm saying.
No, actually,
right
let me.
There's
There's one relevant super chat to what you've just said. And Bizmaster Studio said, "Great to hear your story in full for a change, Aron Ra. It's so freeing to escape indoctrination. Makes you question our other social constructs too." And so this story is very important to people. So we will spend as much time as needed on it because it's a fascinating story. And I'll be quite honest, I am captivated. So please continue.
Well, thank you very much.
We got time.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. The primary evidence that I had for my entire belief system was an episode of In Search Of. It was fucking Leonard Nimoy. I wish that I could have conveyed this to Leonard Nimoy when he was alive. You know how you fucked my life up. Yeah, they did this one episode where they were talking about Kirlian photography. And that is, Kirlian photography is real. It's where you have metallic plates, and you can put something between these plates, and the plates will read their electrostatic energy. So you get an impression of the electrical field of the thing that's inside it. So they put a leaf between these plates, and you get a beautiful photoelectric effect of the leaf. You can see all the veins of the leaf, and it's a different kind of an impression that you would get with a regular photograph. You're seeing everything in tiny phosphorescent blue sparks, but you can make out the veins of the leaf, the shape of the leaf, everything, right? So what they did in this episode of In Search Of was they then take the leaf out, and then that part is real, and they don't tell you, and everything else we're about to tell you is complete bullshit fabricated for entertainment value. They don't bother to say that. So I'm a 12-year-old boy, I'm watching this thing, and they take that leaf and they cut it in half, and they put it back under these or between these photoelectric plates. And so what you get is the half of the leaf that you would expect to see. But then they say on an overexposure, the whole leaf appears. And that to me was proof of life force. I'm a 12-year-old boy. I'm watching a pseudo documentary of fake science given to me by somebody who seems like a perfect authority on what is logical. I have no idea that I'm being lied to. So I have scientific evidence of life force. And if a leaf has it, then that means why would people go to heaven and dogs not? Right? It's like everything that is alive would have a life force, everything. So I had a very complex kind of concept of reincarnation. Let's say that the life force that is, let's say, what makes a life force? You have you have clay, and you're going to model clay into a figurine. And the only way you can do that is when the clay is wet, right? You can only mold it when it's wet. But then when the clay dries, then all of that moisture has evaporated out of it. And the evaporation goes back into the hydrosphere, right? Becomes one with everything, so to speak. And the clay goes dust to dust, right?
Yeah.
So life is only the malleable part of the clay, the part that can move when it's infused with the life force or the water like the clay. Now, taking that same analogy, when you die, this is the glass, this now empty glass is your life force. You pour it back into the ocean, and now you've recombined with that oneness. Now you can go immediately, grab it and dunk that glass to get you back. But even if you did it right then, you wouldn't get all of you. You might get some of you. But some of the rest of it for your next life would be part you and part mold, part gnats, part fungus, part bacteria, other living organisms. And that's why you can't remember your past life. Or if you do remember your past life, it's all muddy. Again, I'm going back to the mindset that I had back when I was a spiritually addled hippie.
Yeah.
And so I had this concept of this is how reincarnation works, and this is what the life force is. And then I remember when we finally got the internet, and this was the big epiphany for me, was I'm like, I haven't heard anything about Kirlian photography in decades. Let me go look it up. Let me see what new discoveries we've had. And then very quickly, I came across an article where they're interviewing Leonard Nimoy. And Nimoy admits in that interview that they made all that shit up.
Oh, wow.
For entertainment value. And there was no truth to it at all. I'm getting the admission from him, from the article, from the interview. Like, that was bullshit? I based an entire belief system on that. I spent decades of my life believing this based on this one fucking lie from this one fucking show.
Nimoyism. That's the religion.
This entire story has just seriously inspired me. You know what would make a great show? Is a show just on these mockumentaries. That's what I'm going to call them. And literally call it, Leonard Nimoy Ruined My Life. That would make a great title. Sorry.
Yeah, and he has no idea.
No.
I'm sure he has no idea. Or had no idea. If he has no ideas now, does he?
No, none.
Yeah, so I was shocked at that. That was the last domino to fall in my whole list. I had long since given up astral projection. I had I'd given up the telekinesis, the remote viewing, all of these Loch Ness monsters. A long time ago, I'd given up all these things, realized there was no substance, no truth to any of them. That was the last thing I had left. And so now I had to reevaluate them. I had to think, what shared memories. The girl who did the astral projection test, who did so well, the hippie druidic magic kid who was like always surrounded with teenagers, teenage girls, I'm sorry, from high school. There had to be some truth to this, right? I mean, I'm thinking about the event that we had, the fighting the gargoyles that one night, and realizing that although I remember these things, they didn't happen because they couldn't have happened. And now I have to wrestle with the fact that I remember this happening. And I know that there's somebody else out in the world who also remembers this happening. And yet I have to come to grips with the fact that it didn't. How do you wrestle with that? So through, again, the power of the internet, I find both of those people, the Druid hippie and the Transcendental Meditation girl. I find both of them, and I'm expecting that they're going to be believers, and that I'm the one skeptic, and then and we're going to have a very uncomfortable conversation because they're going to remember what I remember, and they're going to want to hold to that belief. Not only did they not remember everything the same way that I did, detail per detail, neither one of them remembered any of it at all. Period.
Wow.
None of it.
Wow.
Both of them now are hardcore skeptics, don't believe in anything supernatural whatsoever. And the events that so motivated me and kept me going for years, they don't remember any of it.
Wow.
It's like it's not just that the gargoyles were there. I may as well have not have been there.
Right. So no telling what real thing happened that you're remembering.
No doubt. And it's a kind of a scary thing, actually, that I've talked to a number of people that I knew decades ago, and they remember things that I don't.
Yeah.
And I have to say that never happened. You know, because I've been hit with a lot of things. I mean, I had a very active youth. I've been hit with a lot of things that we all did or whatever. And like that, no. Nope, not a bit of that sounds familiar.
All right, I'm gonna break in for a minute. I do need to get going. The show's absolutely going to continue without me. I am an appendix, a useless appendage to the show, apparently. So I'm gonna go. But I
You
do want
heard
to say
it
thank
here.
you very much for coming. Yep. Well, everybody was already thinking it.
Yeah.
I am going to go, but before I do, there's just a couple of quick things I got to cover. So we are simulcasting both on the In Time channel and on the GDC. A number of people in the GDC were sitting there going, "Where's the live chat coming from?" It's the In Time channel, so we do hope you'll like and subscribe and go to that. We have had a number of super chats on the GDC. I'm the only one monitoring the GDC, so once I go, unfortunately, the super chats there won't be able to continue. Go to the In Time show. Oh, hold on 1 second. If you go to the In Time channel, you'll be able to do super chats there, and Ansgar will be able to get them. The super chats that we do have, and a couple of comments that were very interesting, but we had, let's see, Helios 575 for $5. Most people suspend their disbelief for God, but Aron Ra chose to suspend God's disbelief instead. We had a question also from Michael Westp. Could we address the hypocrisy of you must be a person of faith to hold public office in the USA? I hope they will get to that. My suspicion is once we discuss sort of a bit more about why Aron or how Aron became an anti-theist, that will come up, but that was a super chat from the GDC side. We also have a couple of interesting questions. Let's see. What was the... I think I missed one that I really wanted to.
I can read a couple on this side if you need, while you find it.
Well, no, because I need to get going. So, Aron Ra has contributed. This was from Rufus Cat 2. Aron Ra has contributed more real, valuable science to humanity than every single religious apologist combined. And then we have a question from Smitty, and this one is. I think, let me see if I want to make sure I'm getting it right. This is a tough question, Aron, so I do apologize. I don't want to ask difficult questions like this where, I think this is friendly, but this is somewhat of a hostile question, but it was asked, and so I need to do it. Ronnie James asks, Dio as frontman, was he best with Rainbow, Black Sabbath, or as a solo act?
Black Sabbath, Mob Rules is one of my top 10 favorite albums of all time.
Nice.
All right. So I think we got that answer. Anyways,
If that's what you consider a tough question.
I have a dry wit. I set up. Once you learn my wit, I just sit there. I set something up, and then people are like, "What the hell is he talking about?"
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Every track on that album, and the previous album, the song "Heaven and Hell" is one of my favorite songs of all time by Dio. Not just by Dio. It's one of my favorite songs, and it happens to be by Dio, and that's great.
And then the last thing I want to say before I bail is there is going to be an after party. It's going to be on Ansgar's channel. So after that, he's going to be doing it. The real reason I'm leaving is to bonk Aron on the head and drag him to the after party. So we'll see if we can, that's my goal. But there is an after party, and Ansgar is going to be hosting it, and it should be a lot of fun. Ansgar, was there something you were going to say before I take off?
Yeah. Since we're taking a pause, I do have 2 super chats to read real quick, and then we can continue on.
All right. Well, let me get going then, because you don't need the super chat, and I do need to go. So thank you all very much, and look forward to seeing the rest of this myself as a viewer. Take care, guys.
Yeah.
See you.
Thanks for having me on.
So real quick, Neil 604 atheist said, "Aron, you rock." I think that's an easy one to get through. And Godless Schumer said, "Hi Aron, just wanted to say thanks for what you do. Especially enjoyed you giving inmate 06452017 an intellectual paintbrushing last year."
That was I got an obscene amount of pleasure from that exchange.
It was
my wife
great.
accused me of cheating on her with Kent Hovind because I devoted so much time to the interaction with him because it was a perverse pleasure whooping his ass.
Well, like the only
Absolutely.
thing he could really stick on is you've got a fan on your hair. Like that was like his. How many times did he had to mention? Well, you look good, proving I'm right.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So there was another question or another place that we were supposed to go after this, and I want to jump back into track real quick because unfortunately I can't stay a long time myself.
Fair enough.
I'm doing half semesters in college right now, going back for a degree in anthropology, and I finished archaeology and anthropology both. I'm sorry, archaeology and paleontology both within the last couple of days, and I have my last assignment in Russian is a recorded conversation that I have to have in Russian with one of my students, and I have to do that upcoming. So I won't be able to stay very much longer.
Okay.
But I know that we had a place to go to after this. What was the next?
Well, we wanted to go into what led you into antitheism and why you think antitheism is so damn important.
Yeah. So again, when I discovered the internet and I discovered that everything I knew was wrong, and that I had to reevaluate what my position was, I see that it was simultaneous to that I saw people taking control of public education to demean science and to put in all this pseudoscience for creationism. And that's when I realized that the reason that I wasted so much of my life going off in this weird direction and coming up with an entire belief system based on bullshit was because I've been lied to.
Yeah.
And that it was wrong to lie to people. And it's partially my fault because I'm believing what I read on what I see on television or what I see on the weekly world news. But now I see people being lied to by their teachers and by their textbooks. And that's what prompted me to get involved. And there was another thing too. I was still in the days of Usenet. I was talking on Talk.Origins, and I get in arguments with a bunch of theists. And there was one there that was bragging that his church had helped to elect a number of judges or senators into certain positions because they were working in a coalition. And even though this is unconstitutional, this violates the Johnson Amendment and all that, all these churches were voting as a pact, the way that they were instructed to do, because all their preachers, all their ministers are on phone conversations with political advocates to tell whole congregations to vote so that they make sure that they have religious right conservatives in every position of government at every level. And that's it was only a few months after that that it was revealed that that was the wedge strategy. That if anybody knows what that is, that the Discovery Institute accidentally leaked a memo to the public wherein they were making this plan that they were ultimately going to challenge materialism as so that they wanted to have a supernatural superstition as a scientific explanation, and that the way that they were going to do this was by positioning judges and senators and people in positions of power throughout the country at every level, so that eventually a case like Kitzmiller versus Dover would eventually happen, and that they would be set up by then to counter it, and that the conservative, Republican, Christian, Bush appointed judge would rule in favor of intelligent design. And they did not predict that John E. Jones III would have ruled in favor of science instead.
Right.
And that they ultimately lost that case. But what inspired me was finding out that there was this huge coalition, that there was this literal conspiracy to take over the country. And at the time, it wasn't as innocent as the Discovery Institute was. At the time, R.J. Rushdoony was still alive, and his Chalcedon Institute was claiming credit for having positioned a number of senators in our current government. And there was a recent show on HBO that a lot of people have been making a lot of noise about the Christian right taking over and influencing government officials and everything. But back then, when I first got involved, the Chalcedon Institute and R.J. Rushdoony's Reconstructionism was advocating that they wanted to take over our representative our democratic republic and replace it with a theocracy that enforced Levitical law.
Ooh.
They said the word Levitical law. So they want to make it a death sentence to work on Sunday. So that's what it was a much more extreme than the right-wing religious extremists that we have now. But that was enough to fire me, to know that they had already achieved this much. I knew that there was somebody had to counter this, and I felt utterly powerless, but had to do something. And so I started doing as much as I could. And I found that the more I did, the more I could do. And that's honestly, that's what launched me to where I am.
Oh, geez. So, obviously we don't live in that same time period, but things have changed for the better, but they're not there yet.
Yeah.
I can, as a father, I can say that the state of, for instance, sex education. I'm in liberal California, and the state of sex education is absolutely abysmal, which is one of the reasons I'm pretty hardcore anti-theist myself. I mean, they still teach abstinence first here. I mean, they told my kid that condoms are ineffective. They all have micro holes that the semen can get through, and so they don't really work. Just don't have sex.
Yeah, and I did my sex education in California, and they showed us horrible pictures of venereal diseases. But you know what? That's fair. Those things are real. And if I as a young student had gotten what they called back then VD, if I had gotten that because they hadn't so warned me, I would be angry that I hadn't been so warned, right?
Right.
But don't lie to me at the same time. And my wife was a teacher teaching middle school here in Texas, and they would have moments where they would bring in representatives to speak on behalf of abstinence only.
Right.
And her favorite story about that was this one guy comes in who is some really old man who has a belt just slightly under his pecs, right? Yeah, the belt is all the way up here. Yeah, and he's telling the children how horrible sex is to dissuade them from ever having it. And one of the during the Q&A, one of the students asked, "Does oral sex feel good?" And he said, "No." Oral sex does not feel good because you're too worried about getting an STD the whole time.
Here's the thing. This is when you lie to kids, eventually they figure out you're lying, and then they don't believe you on anything. Anything. Once they figure out you're full of shit, they're done. Oh my God. Helios
Yep.
575 says inmate 0645217 dead named you recently in another show that I was watching, so a couple of us began to refer to him by his inmate number in the chat. Good work.
Very good. I'm really disturbed that that guy is trying to claw his way out of his abysmal hole that he's in by trying to use me to gain popularity somehow.
He's very much a clout seeker at this point.
Yeah, there are some people that have been doing some study, and I wish I could remember the name off the top of my head. There was somebody that's dedicated an awful lot of time to studying the Hovind conspiracies and such, and the things that his own family has said against Hovind. Yeah, Hovind has been largely ostracized from the entirety of his family. His
Wow.
son, yeah, his he had one son that he had for a time incorporated into his bullshit, and that son is still part of the bullshit, but working for Ken Ham now,
Right.
one of his competitors. So the son and the father are estranged. There are other disruptions within the family that are a lot more interesting and terrible at the same time. Kent Hovind is one of the worst people that I've ever encountered, and he's also one of the inspirations behind what I do.
Yeah. So where I have a couple questions. Where do you
Mm.
see the anti-theism movement now? Like, what's its most important, goal at this point? Where is it moving, and what's the future like for anti-theism?
Well, atheism has been for some time now on the rise, and I think it's still the case, although I haven't seen any recent statistics, I mean, for this year. But atheism has been on the rise in all 50 states across the country and also worldwide. The United Kingdom has recently reported that they are now more than 50% atheist as well, more than
Nice.
50%. So wherein when I started my activism, we could only get say 3% of people to admit that they were atheist because they all wanted to pretend that they're agnostic or something, as it, which only hurt our numbers. That's all that does. And when people realize that, well, if I don't believe in God, I fall in the I don't believe in God category.
Right.
So maybe we just, just to clarify confusion, are you convinced that an actual deity really exists? No, then you're on the side of rational people. If you are convinced of that, well, then maybe we could help you. Right? That's two categories. There is not a middle of the road for, well, I'm not convinced that there is one, and I'm not convinced there's not one either. That still means if you're not convinced there's not one, it still means you're not convinced there is one. There's only two categories. Those are convinced and those who are not. We're done. Right? God does not, God, if there was a God, it would not be judged. Oh, well, you didn't believe in me, so you go to hell. You did believe me, so you go to heaven. Oh, you couldn't figure out what the fuck to decide? Where do I put you? I put you with the people who don't believe in me. You go in that category. So that's where that goes.
Right.
Sorry to get on that fucking
No, it's
soapbox.
okay. I mean, my mother-in-law, definitely like she will say she's an atheist. My father-in-law says, I'm more agnostic. I guess that maybe that's the time period they come from or whatever. But that's how they talk about
Yeah.
godlessness in general. Although they do group atheism and agnosticism into the same kind of subcategory, I guess. But yeah, that's how they talk about it, and
Oh,
that's how
good.
I learned it growing up. That's how
Yeah,
I.
no, as far as the where it's going to go, where anti-theism is going to go, honestly, it needs to go towards skepticism and not runaway skepticism where you don't believe that reality exists.
Yeah,
You
how
know,
can you prove reality is real?
yeah, I mean,
Skepticism.
like Descartes, he may be the most famous for saying, I think, therefore I am. I think that was him, but he also said that he couldn't be certain whether he existed. So the only thing he could be absolutely certain of was that God existed, even if he did not. Like, well, then you don't know that you can't know that God exists either. That's just a presumption,
Right,
essentially a presupposition. So I mean, here's the philosopher that everybody lobs against me, and he's talking out of his own ass.
right. So Where is, as far as anti-theism, like the activism side of it, where is the big target right now? Like, what's the
I
where do you
would
think
like
it's
there to be
most
an
important work?
establishment of the rule that we don't. Everything for religion is based on frauds, falsehoods, or fallacies, and every logical fallacy has been used as an argument for God. Every argument for God is a logical fallacy, but the least of all of these, or the ones that bothers me the most, is this shifting of the burden of proof, where I have to prove your every empty assertion you make up. I have to prove it wrong. No, I don't. You have to prove there's substance to it, or you got nothing.
Right.
You can believe whatever you want, but I don't have to disprove it. You have to show justification for it, or we got nothing to talk about. I would like that to be the established rule for all things, so that when you have an elected official who believes in talking snakes, that alone should be enough to dismiss them as a candidate.
So you want to get to the point where it's like kind of opposite of where we have now. Like right now, you can't really get elected into office if you're an atheist. You want to see it where if you believe, you know, if you're religious, that would disqualify you from candidacy.
Well, 10 years ago, 10 years ago, we could say that it was true that you can't get elected as an atheist, but we have a bunch now, open atheists,
Right.
being elected in red states. Arizona last year, or in
Mhm.
the last election cycle, elected 9 open atheists.
That's some
And
that's some work right there. So do
yeah,
you think that
and
we are close to being able to elect an atheist president?
yeah,
Do you
yeah,
think
we
you
are.
think it could happen?
Yeah, we are.
Wow.
Now, that is,
I wonder because that's kind
I,
of that seems like a bold claim to me, but I mean, you have your finger on the pulse, so I'm inclined
well,
to.
I think that Bernie had a realistic shot in the
Mhm.
last election. He did.
Is he openly
I think if
atheist?
what's that?
Is he openly atheist though?
He's not open atheist.
Got
He
it.
doesn't even realize he's atheist.
Okay.
He said, sure, I believe, of course I believe in God. And the God I believe in is we are all in this together. No, you don't believe in a God. You're a secular Jew, which equals atheist.
Right, right. Um,
Which means that you're one of several subsets of atheist.
so do you think that do you think how long do you think before we could actually elect like an open like hello world, I am atheist, right? Like how long do you think do you think we could elect a
Well,
president like that now?
yeah, it's not going to be a platform position. I mean,
Right.
and it should never be that, hey, I don't believe in religion, that's why you should vote for me. That should never be it. But as I said, from my definition, Bernie is atheist, and had he come out and said, no, I don't believe in a God, I don't think that that would have hurt him with his base really much at all.
Gotcha.
You know, yeah,
So
it
so
really
yeah, I
wouldn't
can
have.
see from that point of view. I mean, it still feels like a bold claim, but then again, you know, when you know, gay marriage finally got you know, federal federally legalized, I thought we were years off from that happening. So sometimes these things just suddenly happen. And you're like, whoa, the culture's changed way more than I thought it has.
Yep, yep, that is the case. And while Bernie, I can't call him an open atheist because, as I said, I don't think he even realizes that he falls in that category. So if you don't realize yourself, and most atheists don't. You know, I mean, I myself, I was an atheist for 15 years before I realized what an atheist is,
Right.
because I've been lied to about what the word atheist means. So I called myself an agnostic pagan for Christ.
Interesting.
So
That is an
I would
interesting
help
position.
people out of that bit of confusion. Do you believe in God? Yes, you're theist. No, atheist. Done.
My I'm going to talk more about my, you know, deconversion later on this show. We actually have a whole thing scheduled where Nick is actually going to kind of interview me like we're interviewing you. But as someone who has,
Can I ask about that? Can I?
yeah, sure.
I want to make sure that I mention at some point while I'm on the show. We talked about it before we started recording about why I think deconversion stories are so interesting.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, because
Please.
when you talk about people, when you talk to people about why they became religious,
Uh,
it's like there's two or three categories for the reason. Okay, well, you're in category A, B, or C. Yeah, so you were a stone drunk coke whore. That's or crack whore, I guess.
yeah.
Whichever is the more pejorative. Okay, so that you started from that position, or you were raised with religious. You were raised with religion and kind of believed that it was always true, but didn't really care about it until you decided that you cared about it. So now you accept the belief that you already believed. So that's this other category, right? But you don't have a whole lot of options for how people become religious, and they're never interesting stories. They're just not. There's like uh, Cameron. What's his name? Kirk Cameron,
Right, yeah.
who said that he was a card-carrying atheist. He never was, right? And so he gets out of his car and prays to God to show him that he's real. You're asking him if he's real.
Yeah.
That therein already implies that you have assumed the conclusion that he is real. You already believed in him.
Yes.
I don't talk to invisible things that aren't there, asking them to show themselves to me, unless I think they're really there.
Well, and almost
So,
every public religious figure has to have some kind of story about how they didn't believe, they were down and out, and God revealed himself. It's become a cultural expectation.
down and out.
Hmm?
Yeah. And so when I started finally meeting atheists in foxholes,
Yeah.
that was very encouraging to me, to realize that it doesn't matter how bad your situation is, that you're not going to call on magic invisible spirits to aid you, because they're not fucking there. And sometimes real life situations, real world problems require real world solutions. And so when my granddaughter was dying of cancer in the children's hospital, and a friend of mine that I like, this is a guy I like, and I think he's a great guy, put his hand on my shoulder. He's a minister, and he's an evangelical minister. He says, "I will pray for you." And I had to go off on him. Don't bring that fucking pretend around me right now. And when she's gone, know now that if you tell me that she's in a better place now, you'll get this shape impressed in your face. Don't even tell me that.
Yeah.
I actually was brought into a meeting at the children's hospital, at that very children's hospital.
I've been in children's hospital. My son's a cancer survivor.
Well, I was at a meeting of their clergy. They did a handful of people and they wanted to meet with an atheist, because more and more of their patients are atheists. And they said to me that they noticed that the little platitudes that would make believers happy not only didn't work on the atheists, but actually enraged the atheists. And they said, what do we say? What can we say to a non-believer that will comfort them? And I said, no, that's a trick,
Yeah,
because
that's
we don't want
hard.
bullshit. We don't want bullshit. We want your humanity. Very often, there's nothing you can say in a situation like that. The best you can do with your religion is to lie to people, and that's all you're doing, and that's not going to work for us. But I tell you what, if you put an arm around me, if you cry with me, that means something.
That gives you, we're a social animal, and just having that knowing that there's someone there that cares, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
knowing that there's somebody there that has your back, even if there's nothing they can do, is a big deal. It's a really big deal. Well, hello, dog.
Yeah, I apologize. I have dogs.
No problem. By the
Yeah.
way,
So
Dave Dalafiore, I believe Dalafiore, says Aron is the man.
much appreciated. I would have said that faster, but I'm still muting for the dogs barking over here.
No problem.
Yeah. So the reason that I like deconversion stories is because there's a huge range of reasons for what drew people out of religion. What was it that cracked the armor? That's always a different story. And
Yeah.
it doesn't fall into the two or three categories for how people got into religion. It's always interesting, isn't it?
Yeah,
What
there's a
was the
lot of
thing?
really interesting and fascinating stories. One of the people that we're going to be having on soon is Neil 604 Atheist. I know you talked to him too. And he has collected all of these fascinating deconversion stories. And so I can't wait to talk to him because I want to get his perspective on all the different people that he's talked to and some of the more interesting stories that he's collected, you know?
I took Neil 604 Atheist out in Deep Ellum here in Dallas. We went to a place called, I think it's called the Monkey Grill, where they have these super hot noodles. I mean, turned up to 11. If you like crazy spicy food,
I do.
this will definitely push your limit, man. And Neil dined with me. We broke peppers together.
Nice.
All right, I'm going to have to bail. This has
All
been
right.
fun. I'm glad you guys had me on, but I do have a one last homework project for this semester that I've got to jump into. So
We were absolutely honored, and we would love to have you on again. We really, truly would. So
thank you very much.
please come back and please share more interesting stories. And I'm sure we can find a number of interesting subjects to talk with the one and the only Aron Ra, whose links are in the description, by the way.
Thank you very much. If you like what I do, patreon.com/ARONRA. I need all the help I can get. Thank you very much.
And you do great work. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. I'm out.